All right, so in this lesson right here, what I want to do is provide an introductory overview to the editable poly. Now, warning, this is a very basic lesson. This is designed for the beginner working with 3ds Max that's not familiar with working with editable anything really, editable polys or an editable mesh when modeling. So we're going to talk a little bit about the sub-objects that actually make it up. And we're not going to get into any of the tools. That's, of course, the idea of all of the other lessons that are available. But I just want them to kind of become familiar with working with the editable poly itself. How do we convert to an editable poly, etc. So the very first thing that I'd like to do is discuss what a polygon is and what an editable poly is. Now, a polygon is basically, very basic here, just a surface that has 3 or more sides. Okay? Now, we generally refer to these sides as edges, and later on we'll be seeing how we can work with edges as a sub-object level type. So it's basically we'll be grabbing a side and moving it. Now, these edges just happen to be connected by what, Mr. Logan?
Vertices.
Vertices, which if you're referring to one of these vertices, as they call them, in a singular form, just to say it is referred to as a vertex. And in multiple, it's referred to as vertices. I'm only saying that because with dealing with beginners, with working with 3D, they get into the habit of saying vertexes. Let me grab all of these vertexes over here. No, they're called vertices, just letting you know there.
Get some terminology down.
Exactly. So, so basically, an editable poly is an object that's made up of all of these polygons, and the editable poly itself has got like 5 different sub-object levels that we can get in there and work with, and we'll take a look at those in just a second. So first, let's go ahead and start out and see how we can actually create an editable poly object. Let's go ahead and start by picking on just a standard primitive. I'll go ahead and select a box. That'll work good. And let's just drag out a box here. Let's give it a little bit of height. And I'll right-click and go ahead and come over here to my command panel and switch over to the Modifier tab. And, you know, you see box, and down here in my parameters rollout, I've got all of my basic creation parameters available that are used for generating the geometry that we see over here in our viewports. Okay, meaning that if I wanted to, I can come in here and I can still interactively adjust my length, width, and height, etc. I can come in here and add segments. Now, as I start adding these, take a look at this. Add a couple, add a couple. You see changes occurring in my orthographic viewports, or not even, the reason they're occurring in the orthographic viewports is because I'm viewing in wireframe right now. Down here in my perspective view, of course, if I was viewing in wireframe, let's hit F3, I can see these edges being added, or the segments being added as well. Let me go ahead and hit F3 again. So in shaded mode, this is just something that you're probably going to want to do when modeling. I'm going to come up here to where it says perspective in the upper left-hand corner of the viewport. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to come down to edged faces. Turn edged faces on, and now I kind of get the best of both worlds. I get it shaded, my geometry shaded, that is, and I also see the actual segments now as I come in here and I add them. Okay? Pretty handy, eh, Logan?
Yep.
Even more handy would be the hotkey.
Right.
So as opposed to going up there and selecting edged faces all the time, you could simply hit F4 to toggle the edge faces on and off and back on again. Okay? So it just acts like a toggle. So now that we've kind of talked about these basic creation parameters, and it's something that we visited, of course, in the past VTMs, what happens when I convert this thing over to an editable poly? We're going to lose all of these. So there are times when modeling that you may want to actually keep all of your creation parameters. And the way you would go about doing that is you would actually apply a modifier on top of box and then start modifying at sub-object levels from there, and you'd still be able to go back down in your stack to box itself and start making adjustments to your creation parameters. But this can cause trouble, can't it there, Logan?
Right, because depending on what changes you make inside that modifier, if you go back below it and then like totally change how many segments you have, then all of a sudden you have like different input geometry.
Exactly. A quick example, if I was to come down here and throw an editable mesh or an edit mesh modifier on top of box, and now I've got all of my sub-objects I can gain access to, and if I was to come in here and start shaping, so let's say I grab that and let's go ahead and move tool and do, I have no idea what I'm making. It's just going to be something really fast here. So yeah, this is exciting. So we've made that really cool thing right there, and then for whatever reason I come back down here later on to box and I decided that I needed to adjust my actual segments. You notice that as I change my segments to give myself more detail, that I'm now starting to get
Unpredictable results.
Unpredictable results, not a good thing. Now, of course, I can come up here to the editable mesh itself and simply delete the modifier, and it's going to go back to the box, and everything's going to be back to normal. So, that may not be a desired thing that you're going after there. But I just wanted to point out that you can keep your creation parameters if you need to. So let's go ahead and just kind of simplify this a little bit again. So 2, 2, and 2 looks good. Now, finally, to the moment. How do we convert this thing over to an editable poly? So a couple of ways we can go about it. I'm going to simply right-click in my modifier stack, and you'll notice in the context menu that I get something called Convert To. And if I come down here, there's several different things that I can convert to. An editable mesh, editable patch, editable poly, and NURBS object. So let's go ahead and convert this over to an editable poly and take a look at what happened. Now we don't have our creation parameters no more. The word box up here is gone. In fact, if we expand editable poly, it's not even hiding up under here. Box is now gone forever unless you hit undo. So if there's a chance that you may need to get back to it, you could always you select the object and save the selected object out. But you know what? We're not dealing, let me find a better way to put that. Let's say that you've got box and then a ton of modifiers on top of it, and there may be some reason that you need to get back to box or any of the other modifiers. Then you may want to select the object and do save select it and save that out so that you can get to it later before actually converting it to an editable poly like I've done here, because basically the stack will be collapsed. That means you're not going to have any of these other modifiers still available, so you're going to lose all those parameters. Does that make sense, Logan?
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've got our editable poly, you can see the 5 different sub-object levels that we have available that I was talking about at the very beginning of this lesson. We've got the vertex, edge, border, polygon, and element. Now that's one way of converting over to an editable poly. Let's take a look at another way real quick. Let's go ahead and just come up here and right-click. Let's see, convert to base. That was the last thing we just happened to do, so that worked out good. So I could also simply, now we're back to box, I could simply right-click on the geometry itself, and in my quad menu I can come down here to convert to, and then from there you'll see there's all the different things I can convert to, and I can convert to editable poly. So I'll go ahead and convert over, and you see the exact same thing has happened over here inside my modifier stack. It's gone back to an editable poly again. Now, forewarning, over here, your parameter rollouts are going to be a little bit different by default. I've got all of my things closed up just to keep things nice and neat here at the very start of this. You're going to have a lot of these different things expanded, so don't let that confuse you. If you want to make your screen kind of in sync with mine, just simply minimize all of your different rollouts over here. Keep selection open up, and you'll have the same thing I've got. Now, we got this editable poly by starting out with
a box,
a standard primitive. There's other things we can do. Basically, just about every object type that's geometry related. In other words, standard primitives that are, NURBS, geometry, standard primitives. Almost getting myself tongue twisted there. Let me say that again. So standard primitives, NURBS, patches, splines. Basically, we can convert everything.
Shapes.
Almost shapes themselves over to editable polys. Let me demonstrate. I'll come over here to shapes, and let's see. Let's pick on a star. Let's make something strange. Drag out a star. There's my first radius. Let's go ahead and give our second radius, maybe something like that. Let's make a really expensive European coffee table or little table thing, something like that. I don't know. So here we are with our simple shape. I'm going to come over here to the modifier tab again. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to come down here, convert it to an editable poly, and check it out. Shaded. We actually have a surface now between all the edges. Okay, that's pretty cool. Now, something to be aware of, if I was to rotate around and take a look at the bottom right now, it's not shaded. You got to be aware that we have normals that we must take into consideration right here. The surface normal of this guy happens to be pointing outwards in this direction so that we can actually see it when we're on this side of the surface itself. But when we rotate over to the bottom, surface normal is now pointing away from us, so we see right through it. So unless we force two-sided or we apply a material with two-sided type on it, we're not going to see this side. Okay, and very shortly I'm going to show you how we could cap it, though. We'll actually talk about that briefly in this lesson right here. Then we'll talk about it more a little bit later on. Another thing to kind of be careful about when dealing with normals like this is if edged faces happens to be off. Let's just turn that off. Look at that. It looks like the object has gone away. But guess what? It's not gone away. It's still there. It's just that we don't see this side. Okay? There it is. Now it's gone. There it is. Now it's gone. Okay, too much fun there. Let's go ahead and hit F4 again. As long as we've got F4 hit, we can still see the outline of it up on the bottom. Now, let's take this thing, now that we've converted it over to an editable poly, let's just play with a couple of the tools that we have available for us, since, after all, this is kind of an introduction to the editable poly itself. This will give you guys kind of an idea, some of the things you can do, and it may get some of you beginners out there really excited about modeling using editable poly objects. So let's start out by just coming over here into our polygon subobject selection. Let's go ahead and open this up. And let's simply select it. Let's grab extrude here, and we'll interactively drag out, I don't know, something about like that, maybe a little bit more, something about like that. Let's come up here into our front viewport. Let's just select across like this. Let's go ahead and do an extrude again, but this time we'll go ahead and open up our settings dialog box. And we don't want to do it by group. You see we get a really weird shifting right here. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Let's do it by local normal, and let's just go ahead and expand that up. I don't know, something like that. Tell it OK to commit those changes. So this is our exciting shape right now. Not too exciting, huh, Logan?
No.
Let's make it a little bit more interesting. One of the cool things we have access to with editable polys is a rollout that's called subdivision surface. So I'll go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to tell it I want to use NURMS subdivision. So I'll go ahead and activate that. And then down here in display, next to iterations, I'll go ahead and turn my iterations up to, let's say, 2. Now, that's starting to become a little bit more interesting, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
Now let's make it look a little bit stranger, just, this is just for examples. I'll go ahead and select the polygon star here in the middle. Let's go ahead and come back up, and let's grab bevel, and let's just kind of bevel this thing. I don't know, we'll go down with it. Let's go ahead and open it up a little bit. Let's go down again to make it a little bit tighter. Open that up perhaps a little bit further. If we wanted to, we could hit F4 now to turn that off so that we don't get so misled by all of the tons of lines all over the place. That could be kind of confusing. So let's go ahead and go down a little bit further now that we have indented that one in. So about right there. And now let's just, let's see, we'll bring this one up and bring it in. And now let's just actually start going up with it. As for what am I creating, I have no idea.
No, whatever it is, it's more organic than it was.
Yes, it is. So now we're starting to work on an actual, I don't know, what would you say? This is some sort of plant or something as opposed to an exotic table, but it gets the job done. So there we go. So that's the top of our, and let's go ahead and come back up here to editable poly, deselect, and there is our very scary looking thing that we've just created. Maybe make little fountains and spraying some water out or something. I don't know. Something crazy, yes, indeed. But, the idea is we just started from a shape. This was just a star, and within just a few seconds, we've gone in here and given it this organic, weird, plant-looking feel, which was supposed to be a table. Just kidding. Actually, it was. But so moving on. So this is just kind of a look at playing with the editable poly for a second. Now, we've got the 5 different sub-object levels that we can gain access to. You just saw where I was actually working with the polygon. Before we move out of this whole lesson, let's spend just a second and talk about what they actually are. First, let's go and pick on our box. It's a little bit easier to deal with. Vertex. The vertices themselves are, as we said earlier, just the points in space that are used to connect the actual edges together. And then the polygon surface actually exists between those edges. It's what holds all the edges together, if you will. So I can come in here, I can grab these different these different vertices and simply move them around, okay, for modeling. I can come to edges, and now I can actually, let's go ahead and hit F4 again, turn edge faces on. I can select edges. And yes, I can move edges around as well. Okay, so there I am moving edges around. Borders are something that's only available when working with an editable poly. Let's show you what a border is real quick. I'm going to come over here to Polygon. And let's just select these guys right here and delete them. So now we're left with a giant hole, and because of surface normals, we are seeing right through these 3 sides right there. But we're left with a hole in our geometry, a hole in our mesh. And this hole has a border around it that defines where the actual hole is. So if I now come back up here to border, check this out. Ta-da-da, there's the actual border right there. And this is good because I can now actually cap that border if I wanted to. So with border selected, if I come up here come down here to the Edit Borders rollout, click Cap, that just caps it with a single polygon. Okay? Now, I can apply that all the way back over here. Let's go ahead and come out of sub-object mode so that we can select this guy. Let's come down here to border, and he does have a border. Remember when I started out with it being just a shape, and then I went from there? Guess what? It's a giant hole in him right down here. So I can select. Okay, so there you can see it's highlighted in red, or hopefully you can see. And then I can cap that. Now when I cap that, or cap this is pretty interesting to note. It's not like it's just butting up a new polygon face to the end of your shape that's already there, or your geometry that's already there. It's actually basically welding a whole new polygon into the whole geometry itself. In other words, we won't have multiple vertices at all of my edges right here. It'll just be a single vertex at each edge. So take a look. Dink, cap, and you can see I just proved my point, because now it looks like my geometry right here was smoothed out from the very beginning. Okay?
Right, like as though it was already capped before you started applying the NURMS subdivision.
You got it. Absolutely. So so there's just a quick look at that. So that's working with or dealing with borders. We also have polygons. Let's go ahead and switch back over here and go back into Polygon. Remember we said earlier, Polygon itself is basically a surface that has 3 or more sides. Well, here's a side or an edge, however you want to look at it. I'm going to start saying edges from now on out because you get the idea. So edge, 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 and they're all held together by that polygon. Okay, simple enough. So you see I can go through here and I can select different polygons. And of course, once I've selected a polygon, if I want to, yes, I can come in, I can scale them, I can slice them, I can add additional detail to them. There's a bunch of different things that I can do when working with the polygon subobject itself. And we'll be looking at those a little bit later on in this VTM. All right, so finally, we've got the element. And what the element is basically it's like the object itself. But you can actually have multiple objects that you've attached all together into one object, and you can still gain access to each of them individually by going to the element subobject.
So you can have multiple elements.
Multiple elements, absolutely. So take a look at this. Right now there's only one in here. I mean, this guy over here is his own object at the moment. But if I come back up here, actually I didn't have to, but if I come back up to Editable Poly, and I come down here to Edit Geometry Rollout, let's go ahead and open that up, and there's Attach. If I have this geometry selected, and I hit Attach, and I move my mouse over this guy right here, the moment I click him, a couple things are going to happen. One, I'm going to lose the NURMS that I'm using on him right now. The subdivision surface stuff is going to go away, and he's going to become hard-edged again. And he's also going to become purple because he's going to be this object. Okay, it's all going to become this one object.
Attached to that purple object, so you'll inherit everything that the purple object currently is. Absolutely.
So click, he's purple. That's the weird, freaky thing that we actually made just a few minutes ago before we got to see it all smoothed out. And you can see he is now purple. And look at my bounding box. It surrounds both of these objects because we're only dealing with one object. Let's go ahead and come out of Attach. And let me show you by coming up here to Select by Name, open up the Select Objects dialog box, and all we have is one object in our scene, Box 01. So let's go ahead and close that out. And now let's come back in here. If let's say Vertex, I grab Vertex, you can see now I'm dealing with the vertices of both of these guys, again, being treated as a single object. But if I come down here now to Element, check this out. Select this guy, he's an element. Select this guy, he's an element. And I have the ability to go in here and reposition these elements around however I may need to. So I can move that around. I can move this guy around. If I wanted to grab rotate and rotate him around, I get all of this control now when working with element subobjects.
So Max remembers what objects were individual before they were attached.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if they're separate pieces of geometry that's away from each other, they're treated as separate elements as well.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that's going to do it for me for this lesson right here. The whole idea was nothing more than just to introduce you to basic concepts like what is a polygon, what is an editable poly, then to move into how can we take a standard primitive and actually convert a standard primitive into an editable poly, and to mention that we could also convert NURBS and patches, etc., into editable polys as well. And then I also took the time to show you that we could take shapes and convert them over into editable polys, and we made something strange out of it. And then we just took a look at the 5 different subobject types that are available inside an editable poly, and we did a little bit of manipulation with those subobject types. We talked about attaching, and we spent just a second and we took a look at subdivision surfaces using NURMS to give us a nice smoothed out look with the one strange looking thingamajig that I made. So that's going to pretty much conclude it for this lesson. This should be enough to get a beginner up and running and comfortable with the concept of an editable poly. So now let's go ahead and move into some other lessons where we actually take the time to start looking at all of the different things that we have available to us over here in these rollouts. So thanks a lot, guys.